Hey, welcome! Today we're going to dive into a pretty provocative theory from a single book that claims to draw a direct line between our spiritual lives and our physical health. Let's get right into it.
So right out of the gate, the book hits you with this huge question, one that people have wrestled with for, well, forever. Is there a connection between sin and disease? It's a really bold way to start, and it sets the stage for everything that follows.
The source for this whole explainer is a book from 2003 called In His Own Image, and its author argues that the answer to that question is a hard yes. Now, our job here isn't to agree or disagree with that. We're just going to walk through the theory, step by step, exactly as it's laid out in the book. But first, and this is super important, let's look at the book's own disclaimer. The author makes it crystal clear. They are not a medical doctor, and this is not medical advice. It's key to remember that we are exploring a spiritual theory, not handing out prescriptions. All right, so what's the big idea here? What's the core premise? At its heart, the book is trying to build a bridge, one that connects spiritual ideas with actual physical, biological processes. So let's see how it tries to build that case. And the book doesn't just jump in. It actually tries to place its ideas within this long history of mind-body philosophy. It points to figures way back like Hippocrates and Galen and later Renaissance thinkers who all believed that our emotions could directly impact our physical health. The author then makes the claim that modern medicine, with its focus on drugs, has kind of lost sight of this ancient connection. Okay, so if thoughts can affect our bodies, how does that actually work? What's the mechanism? This next part of the book is all about explaining the how, the specific biological pathways it claims our thoughts use to influence our physical well-being. And this is where it gets really interesting. The book leans heavily on this field called psychoneuroimmunology. It's a mouthful, I know, PNI for short. The book defines it as the study of how all these things are connected: our thoughts and emotions, our brain and nervous system, our hormones, and at the end of the line, our immune system. So think of it like a chain of command, a domino effect inside your body. According to the book, it all kicks off with a thought or an emotion. That's the trigger. That signal then zips through the brain and nervous system, which then tells the endocrine system, your glands, to release hormones. And those hormones are what ultimately impact your immune system, which is where the physical effects start to show up. All right, so if that's the pathway, what's the actual trigger? What kicks the whole thing off? Well, the book points to a familiar villain, stress. But, and this is a big but, it defines it in a way you've probably never heard before. And honestly, this right here, this is probably the most important slide for understanding the book's whole argument. The author completely redefines what a stressor is. We usually think of a stressor as something outside of us, right? A deadline, a traffic jam. But in this theory, the real stressor is the internal negative emotional response. The book then goes even further, labeling these specific emotions, like unforgiveness, anger, or fear, as sin. And here are the kinds of things the book is talking about. These are the internal states it labels as the real stressors: unforgiveness, resentment, anger, guilt, loneliness, fear, jealousy. The argument is that these are the actual triggers that start that whole biological chain reaction, eventually leading to a weaker immune system. So how do these feelings cause a physical problem? Well, the book connects them directly to something we all know about: the fight or flight response. The theory it presents is that a purely emotional stressor, like deep-seated resentment, can trigger the exact same flood of stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, as a physical threat, like seeing a bear in the woods. And to explain how this becomes a long-term chronic issue, the author brings in this classic model of stress. First, you have the alarm reaction, that's the initial fight or flight kicking in. But if that emotional stressor doesn't go away, the body enters the stage of resistance, where it's just working overtime constantly. Eventually, according to the model, you hit the stage of exhaustion. This is where the body's resources are just depleted and systems start to wear out. But you might be wondering, how does this become an automatic thing? Something that just happens without us even thinking about it. The book's answer is conditioning. It argues that our bodies can actually be trained to have these negative physical reactions. The book applies the idea of classical conditioning, think Pavlov's dogs, but for our immune system. It gives an example related to chemotherapy. A patient gets a drug that suppresses the immune system in a hospital. After this happens again and again, the theory suggests that the environment itself, the site of the hospital, the specific smells, can become a trigger that causes the immune system to weaken, even before the drug is administered. In the book takes this idea and runs with it, suggesting something pretty profound.
that even a tiny, unconscious trigger from a past trauma, a sound, a smell, a sight that you don't even consciously register, can be enough to set off that entire physical stress response and suppress your immune system.
To really drive this point home from a spiritual perspective, the author quotes the book of Job, "For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me." The interpretation presented here is that our internal state of fear can actually have the power to help create our external, physical reality. Okay, so we've talked about the problem, according to the book, negative emotions, or sins, kicking off this whole stress cascade. So, what's the answer? What's the antidote? This final section lays out the book's proposed spiritual solution.
The entire solution proposed in the book is really anchored in this one verse from Proverbs: "A merry heart doeth good like a medicine." The author takes this very literally, suggesting that positive emotional states have a direct, real, medicinal effect on the human body.
So it really boils down to this simple, powerful duality presented in the book. On one side, you have negative emotions, which it defines as sin, that cause stress hormones to rise and weaken the immune system. And on the other side, you have positive emotions, like peace and laughter, which the book claims can actually enhance it.
And that leads to the book's ultimate prescription, the key takeaway. What's the number one thing you can do? It's forgiveness. The author calls forgiveness the armor that prevents that initial emotional trigger from ever activating the fight or flight response in the first place. And that, in a nutshell, is the theory laid out in the book In His Own Image. It brings us full circle, right back to that initial massive question, and it's one we're thinking about. Just how much power do our thoughts and emotions really hold over our physical health?